A wise man once said, to be the man, you gotta beat the man. And the Atlanta Braves are going to have to try to do that as they take on the defending champion Dodgers in the National League Championship Series. Welcome into Battery Power. Cory McCartney and Grant McAuley with you. And Grant, for the third time in 4 years, the Braves are going to face the Dodgers in the postseason, and they're going to try to avoid the fate that the Dodgers handed them in 2 of those past 3 meetings.
Yeah, and when you think about 2020, the Braves were that close to dealing the Dodgers that knockout blow. They had them on the ropes, but as it turned out, that was just enough opportunity for a team like the Dodgers to come roaring back, not only win the NLCS at the Braves' expense last year, go all the way to grab that brass ring and become world champions for the first time since 1988. So there's a lot to unpack between these two teams in the recent history, and I think that there's a great rivalry here, but they're coming in with 2 different trajectories, in my opinion. Tail of the tape says the Dodgers are the club to beat, and I don't think it's a surprise to say that they are. They're a 100-plus win team that just knocked out another 100-plus win team to get back to the championship series. But for the Braves, the challenger, if you will, I feel like there's something to be said for getting hot at the right time and playing your best baseball in October. Atlanta's going to have to keep that up if they want to knock off the Dodgers and advance to the World Series for the first time since 1999.
Yeah, no doubt a challenge. Fangraphs says the Dodgers have a better lineup war. They have a better rotation war, a better bullpen war. Yeah. So a gigantic challenge for the Braves here as they take on the Dodgers to try to knock them out and deny them a repeat in a trip to the World Series. So a lot to get into. We will break down every facet of this game. The series gets started Saturday night at Truist Park. So let's get started with the rotations. And Grant, I mean, the Braves rotation was fantastic in the division round. Charlie Morton, the only one of them to give up a run. Shutdown mode for Max Fried and Ian Anderson. They combined for a 1.77 ERA, which when you look in the history of the Braves in this round, had only been bested twice by Glavine, Maddox, and Smoltz in 1996 and 1998. So it's a fantastic outing from those guys. The flip side of it, though, the Dodgers weren't much worse. I mean, they just below them in ERA, just below them in WHIP. So this is setting itself up to have runs be at a premium in the National League Championship Series.
Certainly, and I know we're going to talk about the bullpens, but when you look at the overall body of work in the division series, the Braves, despite 9 fewer innings, almost as many strikeouts, a better ERA, whips were right there, and the rotations were a big reason for that. And the Braves have a big 3, much like the Dodgers do. It's just not as big on the name value that you might expect when you're talking about a multiple-time Cy Young Award winner. Oh, not Clayton Kershaw, Max Scherzer, who they went out and got at the trade deadline. That's a pretty big deal, and obviously he's pitching some of the best baseball that he's thrown in recent memory. He has been Mad Max for them, and we expect to see vintage Scherzer that the Braves know very well from all those years with the Washington Nationals prior to joining the Dodgers. The flip side of the coin, though, is the Braves have their own Mad Max, and he has been maximum Fried. He has been looking terrific since the start of August and has been on a roll at the right time for the Braves. So I do like the matchup. If it does become Max versus Max, then I like the Braves' chances to, at the very least, hold serve and allow for this thing to get into the middle to late innings, and then it's the playoffs. You'll figure out when the bullpen comes into play, and we saw the Dodgers and the approach they had just to get here, in which Scherzer was called into duty to put away the Giants. I'm fascinated to see how it all plays out. There's a lot of different decisions to make, but when you talk about Scherzer, Buehler, Urias, yeah, the Dodgers, even without Clayton Kershaw, they're looking pretty strong, but the Braves have their own postseason pedigree guy in Charlie Morton, and they got a guy in Ian Anderson that has thrown some of his best baseball of his young career on the biggest stage. So I expect to see some very good pitching matchups, and I'm hoping it lives up to all the hype we're about to give it.
Yeah, it would have been a wild conversation back in April to think about this Dodgers rotation into an NLCS. To not have Clayton Kershaw, to not have another Cy Young winner, Trevor Bauer. I mean, obviously Max Scherzer, a big acquisition for them at the deadline. And I think depth to me is the big issue here, right? I mean, think about what happens after you get through Scherzer, after you get through Urias, after you get through Walker Buehler. Yeah. What happens in potentially Game 4? Is it going to be Scherzer on short rest? Does Tony Gonsolin, who hasn't even pitched yet in this postseason, and how are the Braves match that up? Are they going to have to think about short rest for a guy, or do they go with Huascar Ynoa, AJ Minter, Drew Smyly? I think to me, Game 4, it could be a potentially tipping point in this series based upon rotational depth.
But I will say this, before you even start worrying about Game 4, you have to know, for the Braves at least, how did these first 2 games go? Are you taking a series lead out to Los Angeles, a place where things have gone wrong for you time and time again, a place where they were swept in a series, even though it was competitive already this year? it's just not a place where the Braves have gone to have their success. So I feel like, the old school in me wants to say, all right, I need my ace pitcher, my number one guy to start games 1, 4, and 7. But we're not talking about the 1991 World Series here, or the 1991 playoffs for that matter, where the Braves got some very good pitching to get all the way through there, by and large, from the starters. This is a much more specialized game. We know it's going to come down to the bullpens. We'll get to that, but these starters are going to play a big role in setting up their bullpens for success.
I think, to me, though, the depth issue is why I give the edge to the Dodgers in this category. I mean, certainly, the Braves are riding momentum, and if momentum matters, no one was better rotational-wise in the division round than the Braves were.
Yeah.
But you can also preface this by saying they faced a Brewers offense that was basically mediocre. I mean, it was a middle of the road offense throughout the regular season. It showed during the postseason. The Dodgers just took on the best offense in the National League, and now they're going. And then before that, they had the second best for the second half of the season in the Cardinals. So, just what they did and what they went through to get here, two completely different monsters, but nothing to take away from how good that Braves rotation was.
Yeah, and this is what the Dodgers are built for, and they have put the money and the time into constructing this roster so that even when they lose a guy like Clayton Kershaw or Trevor Bauer or whoever it may be, Max Muncy, who they're down, and we'll get to that in a moment, I'm sure, they find a way to plug that in, and their depth has always been a strength. And I think it's a model for clubs in both leagues to really strive for. If you can find a way to have that depth, if you can afford it, the Dodgers have put together a pretty good program when it comes to constructing a roster.
So, not news breaking here. We're obviously both in agreement the Dodgers get the edge in rotation.
So. Yeah.
The pitching stats will absolutely have their hands full in this series. The two most home run hitting lineups in the National League, two of the three highest scoring offenses in the National League. Mookie Betts is red hot going into this series. When we talk about star power, Freddie Freeman riding the biggest moment of his postseason career to date. Grant, what matters to you when you stack up these lineups?
Well, the common theme for the Dodgers, of course, is depth. The Braves, meanwhile, had to make their depth out of necessity because they lost some of their best hitters, a couple of them for the year. Others, or at least one more, and Travis d'Arnaud was gone for a big chunk of the year as well. But there's no bigger bat to lose than Ronald Acuna Jr. Losing Marcell Ozuna did not help out the Braves from a power perspective either. And so they had to rebuild their outfield, and now they have to deal with one of those rebuilt pieces maybe not being available at all in the National League Championship Series in the person of Jorge Soler. But if you're circling one hitter in both lineups that you're going to have your eyes drawn to, and most baseball fans will, it's going to be Mookie Betts for the Dodgers. It's going to be Freddie Freeman for the Atlanta Braves. Both guys showed up and showed out in the National League Division Series. Both guys are going to be expected to do that for their clubs again here in the Championship Series. But I do think the Braves, even without Soler, have an offense that's capable. It's not just Freddie Freeman who powered Atlanta's offense this year. He got some help, and some of that help is still very much available right across the diamond in Austin Riley, all around the infield with Dansby Swanson and Ozzie Albies, and then, of course, some of those outfield power bats are still available. So there is depth there on the Braves side. We just know this Dodgers team has been there before. The Braves have seen it firsthand. It's a tough lineup to navigate, especially night after night after night to win a 7-game series.
There are key components in both these lineups, though, that are scuttling. Justin Turner is hitting under 100. Chris Taylor, Trey Turner, they're struggling off from the Dodgers side. Then you look at the Braves, and you mentioned Dansby Swanson. Likely batting leadoff with Jorge Soler out. Jock Peterson could get some opportunities against right-handers. He didn't hit so well in the NLDS. Travis d'Arnaud strikeouts were an issue for him. Basically anybody not named Eddie Rosario, Austin Riley, and Freddie Freeman, Jock Peterson were especially hitting well in the NLDS. But depth, I think, is the tipping point in this whole thing. You look at the Dodgers, and you've got the likes of, AJ Pollock and Albert Pujols, a future Hall of Famer, just hang out on the bench. We know what the
it's good work if you can get it.
We know what the Braves did at the deadline in adding so much depth, but you mentioned a piece of that depth, Jorge Soler, not going to be available. But I think about momentum and what that matters going into this, and certainly what the Braves did after the deadline, hitting the most home runs of any National League outfield. That matters. I know the Dodgers are going to have guys when you look up and down that lineup that just open your eyes. But Max Muncy, in all likelihood, not going to be a part of this series.
Be available.
So that to me, I think I'm going to give the Braves an edge here, and I think a lot of it's built on momentum. And it's built on those key components like Freddie Freeman and Austin Riley coming up big in this series.
Yeah, at the very worst, these lineups to me are a push, but I do feel like the Braves have a little bit more momentum, and you're also looking at the Braves were able to get through their series in 4 games, rest up a little bit, kind of reset, at least mentally, get set to host this series against the Dodgers despite the disparity in records. Meanwhile, LA's got to go all the way across the country and start out with 2 games on the road. That probably won't be an offensive kickstart, especially if you're talking about facing Max Fried and Ian Anderson. Anderson throws extremely well at Truist Park, so the Braves have a lot of things going for them, even though they're here without Ronald Acuna Jr. and others that they'd certainly like to have here. I do think this offense is more than just Freddie Freeman, but you're going to have to see Ozzie Albies, Dansby Swanson, Austin Riley, guys like that, and some of these outfielders as well. Maybe Travis d'Arnaud's got one of those hits up his sleeve as well at some point in this series that's going to help his club in a big-time way. Everybody's going to have to contribute if the Braves want to trump the Dodgers in this series and really have an offensive advantage.
Yeah, it's step-up time against some really elite Dodgers pitching. Now, the Braves bullpen was lights out during the NLDS. I mean, Tyler Matzik, Luke Jackson, Will Smith, those workhorses absolutely came to play. The best bullpen ERA during the postseason so far, but the Dodgers are not far behind, and Grant, they have all kinds of weapons.
Yeah, and a lot of times, and for many years, you've thought about Kenley Jansen, but there always seems to be all of those supporting characters that you need to make a really good overall cast of characters out of their bullpen. They've got it again this year. They've got plenty of guys that can step in that have closer stuff like Blake Trinan, and they've got other just good situational relievers who have done the job all year long. Brusdar Graterol, he's grabbing headlines because of the high-octane arm, and that's a pretty nice weapon to have, and that's not even your closer. So I guess to circle back to the Braves and what you're saying, I think this is a group, as I've said before, that is not getting really the credit that it deserves for its recent performance. They're sold a little bit short because there were months of struggles or particular games and things that just got out of hand, and you could lay them at the feet of the bullpen, which over the course of 162 games is going to happen. But I would caution people to look more so at the recent performance, the last couple of months, and the division series to see what these guys are capable of right now. The games you lost in April, May, June, July, none of them were fun, but those aren't the games you're coming into this series with those fresh on your mind. So this is a group that stepped up. Even if the Brewers' offense wasn't the challenge that the Dodgers will pose, you had Tyler Matzak, you had Will Smith, Luke Jackson. I thought A.J. Minter looked great. And the Braves still have some more beyond that, and they're going to need those guys to step in and contribute. There's some depth on both sides. The Dodgers probably have that experience advantage in some ways, but the Braves have a very capable group, even if the name value is not quite the same.
Yeah, the Dodgers, I mean, obviously they were fantastic all year long, but I think you're right. I mean, the Braves, when you look at the second half, the third best bullpen ERA, they got demonstratively better in the second half. The Dodgers were really good during the regular season. They've been really good in the postseason. A 6.8 whip, a 1.67 batting average against. I mean, Kenley Jansen, Brusdar Graterol, Blake Trinan. Max Scherzer apparently has closer stuff, as we saw in the
not surprised
in the NLDS. So they just have so much more depth than the Braves do. I think that is the tipping point. I mean, it's clearly the edge on paper is in the Dodgers' favor here. Yeah. But it's the momentum. I keep using that word momentum in this. That's everything for the Braves right now. And obviously, as we saw during the LDS, when you have those guys that are rolling like Jackson, Matzik, and Smith were, that matters, and it's going to matter going into this series.
It certainly will. And again, this is the confidence that you've built and the performances that are fresh on your mind. These guys should be, even though they had to work a little bit in that division series, with a few days to rest these key pieces of your bullpen, maybe you can go back to them and lean on them as much, and you probably will have to, as you did against the Brewers. But the Dodgers bullpen does not have that same advantage. They did do some starters coming in to help them out to cover some innings, so it's not like they blew up the whole group. But they had to go 5 games against the Giants, then jump on a plane with 1 day off for travel and fly out to Atlanta to start the National League Championship Series. So I think that is an overall collective effect of what the Dodgers will have to deal with scheduling-wise that the Braves did not have to deal with, in addition to having a little bit of time to recharge, which I think has the Braves with a little bit of an X factor, I'll call it that, even if the Dodgers have the better group on paper.
In 2018, the Braves lost to the Dodgers in 4 games. Last year, it goes the full 7 before the Dodgers go on to, of course, win the World Series. So, Grant, as they meet for the 3rd time in 4 years, how does this series play out?
Well, I'd say it's progress, if nothing else. You weren't able to get past the Dodgers in the division series. You take them to the limit in the championship series last year, and by all rights, I think that the Braves had a chance and should have won, of course, the National League Championship Series a year ago. But I go back to looking at how these two clubs enter this series right now. The Braves were able to finish off the Brewers in 4 games, have time to rest and reset, and get ready to host whoever it was going to be, while the Dodgers had to go the limit with the Giants. Now they got to jump on a plane with no real time off, travel across country, and face some tough starting pitchers, the likes of Ian Anderson and Max Fried. Of course, you're going to face them. Fried first, then Anderson. If not Anderson, then Morton. You see what I'm getting at here? There's some good options for the Braves. The Dodgers are going to have their hands full too, despite the fact that they've got all the numbers and all the depth that makes them who they are, and they've shown it. And if you want to know about what it's like to play the Dodgers in those winner-take-all scenarios, the Giants could tell you a little bit about that. They just went through it. So I think Braves in 6. But if it does get to 7, as I just said, a team like the Giants can tell you if it's winner-take-all against the Dodgers, they're a tough team to beat.
As we've already gone over, this Dodgers pitching staff is absolutely elite. By the way, they throw some of the most four-seam fastballs in all of baseball. Max Scherzer, Walker Buehler, Julio Urias, these guys live by that four-seamer.
Yeah.
The Braves eat them up. The second most home runs against that pitch. Freddie Freeman has a top 5 weighted on base average against four-seam fastballs. Styles makes fights. And as much as the Dodgers may have the advantage all over the place when you start looking at the field, I think this plays more into the Braves' favor than probably people want to give them credit for. I'm also going to take Braves in 6, but I agree with you. If it goes 7, I think the depth of the Dodgers ultimately plays out. But I think this is going to be a fascinating series, and we're going to see how much the Braves want this after coming up short last year.
Yeah, and here we are saying Braves in 6, and I'm sure that no national pundits are in danger of having their pick upended quite as much as we are. But truthfully, looking into how these two clubs are set up entering the series, the biggest thing for me is if the Braves can take advantage of the home field advantage in the first 2 games, they can have this series where they want it. If that goes awry, then I think we know how difficult it's going to be to climb that mountain all the way to the top and knock the Dodgers off.
It all gets started Saturday night at Truist Park, and Battery Power is going to have you covered every step of the way. So make sure you go Talking Chops YouTube channel, turn on those alerts, get the notifications after Grant and I drop every single episode of the show. He's Grant McAuley. I'm Cory McCartney. Until next time, Braves Country.